Two big questions today. What is human work in the age of smart machines? And given the evolving nature of work, what are the implications for post-secondary education? I'm Tom Vander Ark. You're listening to the Getting Smart podcast. And today we're joined by three-peat guest, Jamie Merisotis, the 17-year president of the Lumina Foundation in Indianapolis. Jamie, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, Tom, and hopefully third time's the charm.
We connect every couple of years, in part because, well, you're the dean of higher education funders. I think the most important voice in terms of the direction of post-secondary education in America. And you also, in the last 5 years, have become a real student of the implications of artificial intelligence on the nature of work. You wrote a terrific book in 2020 called Human Work in the Age of Smart Machines, where you really articulated a fresh take on the nature of work, where that was headed. It strikes me that since then, we've gone through perhaps two, I like to think of us being in the second inning of age of AI. And just in the last few months, with the introduction of reasoning engines, we now all have access to a really remarkable level of expertise. We've started to see some tech layoffs, some softening in technical employment. What's your take in 2025 on how work is changing?
If you go back to when I did the book was written just before or just as COVID was hitting. And so it's pre-Chat GPT, which now interestingly seems like a long time ago, and pre lots of things. So in that time period, we could sort of see, in greater focus what was coming on what we now call the large language models, these tools that I think sort of change the public's consciousness of what artificial intelligence is. But now, 3 years past the introduction of ChatGPT and all the things that have followed, I think what we understand is that, some of the things that I said were right, which is that, human work fundamentally is being transformed by technology, and that we need to do a better job of first being clear about what humans are uniquely qualified to do, and second, understand how the technology can complement human creativity, human critical thinking and problem solving and ethics and compassion and all those things that are our unique characteristics. And over time, we're starting to see many of these things unfold before us. I think one of the things that I was not right about or couldn't see as clearly back in 2020 is how quickly the adoption would take place, particularly in certain industries, and how that is playing out. I also didn't fully understand then that AI would really be a sort of player in almost everything that we do, right? Our politics, our work, our learning, all of these things, it is coming to the fore now in greater clarity. So, good news, bad news, when you try to write a book where you're trying to figure out, where the puck is going, sometimes you get it right. But more importantly, I think the fundamental question of what are the humans going to do in an increasingly technology-mediated world is right. That's the question we've got to be answering with greater clarity when it comes to education and training, and frankly, when it comes more broadly to our understanding of our human role in society.
I think particularly since your book, it feels like every profession has become computational. We talked about this with a group of computer science teachers in California yesterday, and they're facing this really interesting dichotomy where a lot of people are saying, well, we're not going to have to code anymore because AI does coding for us. And at the same time, every profession has become computational. And so that's an interesting change that just seems to have happened. I think we still need to study computer science, but it's also clear that we need to incorporate data science into the way we think about every profession. I want to talk about empathy. You wrote about this in your book, empathy and compassion as being the truly human skills. Just in the last couple months, we've seen real evidence that these large language models are developing what appears to be a real sense of empathy. And a recent study showed that some people prefer receiving feedback from a large language model more than a therapist,
Right.
which suggested kind of a remarkable level of EQ as well as IQ. What's your take on those developments?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, again, in the advances in terms of reasoning and things like that, that you're sort of getting to this point where you really can sort of mimic human empathy in ways that feels legitimate to human beings. The question is that what humans want in terms of empathy over time, like one-on-one with an agent that's actually interacting with you and dealing with whatever it is that you're wanting to talk about, being compassionate because of your healthcare issue, or being empathetic about your problems at work, whatever it may be, whatever the tool is, whatever the problem is that you're trying to solve. I'm still not sure that the technology is going to have the same kinds of human capabilities that I think we desire as humans, particularly when it comes to human interaction. I don't know many people, and again, this may change, right? We're in uncharted waters here, but I don't know many people who believe that their we'll call them technology mediated interactions are superior to their human interactions. It's that they like them and they benefit from them. In the cases that you're talking about, it's because people are dealing with something very specific and they get that sort of empathetic or compassionate feedback. But long term, I'm not so sure. On the other hand, I think as a complement to the human trait of empathy and compassion and caring and ethicism and things like that, super interesting, right? Again, it becomes another complement to human behavior and human interaction that I think is really exciting and has lots of implications in a variety of fields, particularly in fields where social work and healthcare and education, where these kind of human interactions and things like human motivation are very important to get real-time feedback to encourage you to be more empathetic or what have you.
Jamie, your strategy work stretched all the way out to 2040. So I know you spent a little bit of time in the last year thinking hard about the future of work. What's going to happen? Are we headed for a lot of job displacement starting this year? What's your take? Are you bullish on how AI is going to create new work? Our vice president seems to think that it's going to create new new forms of employment, or are you bearish on the employment market? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think I'm still where I was 5 years ago, which is, it's a sort of two-part argument. The first is technology has always done two things. One is that it has destroyed jobs, that it is actually, a part of the destructive process of what humans historically have done, whether it be the industrial age, the internet age, and now the age of AI. You can see that it is eliminating or destroying certain kinds of human jobs, human tasks that are performed by humans. And that is true in the case of AI. It's also true that it creates new jobs and new opportunities. Again, throughout all of these eras that we've seen historically, including to the present, I think jobs will be created, work will be created because of technology for humans to do. What may be different this time is that the speed and the variability of how that will happen is probably going to be quite different. And I think that's the part, it's the asymmetrical nature of it and the ways in which the technology is actually going to accelerate change in certain areas, whereas in other areas will be stalled, I think is going to be really important to keep our eye on. So I think the worry is that in certain industries you will see great AI adoption, very quick changes in terms of how it's being utilized. In other cases, it may be very slow. And I'll tell you two examples of the two industries that I spend most of my time working in and thinking about: higher education and philanthropy. In higher education, you're starting to see this arc now of change happening, I think, more rapidly, even though a lot of AI came out of higher ed, where you're starting to see now, both from a teaching and learning perspective, but particularly from a back office perspective, AI really starting to change the way in which traditional institutions of higher education operate. In philanthropy, I have to say less so. You and I have both worked in the field of philanthropy, and it's interesting that Lumina does use AI. We use it in our grants management. We certainly use it in our communications team and some other areas, but we are considered a fairly high user of AI compared to many of our partners in philanthropy. Some actually say that they don't use it at all, or at least they're not conscious of the fact that they're using it. They may actually be using it and not know it.
Right.
But I think that these two sort of examples of the fields I know best are sort of case studies of the way in which there's going to be differential adoption depending on what the nature of the work is and how you want to get it done.
Jamie, some commentators think entrepreneurship is the job of the future, and in related commentary, noted technologists like Andrei Karpathy have said agency is now more important than intelligence, that your capacity to take action on the world based on your interest and strengths. Do you buy the importance of entrepreneurship? Is the future going to be as much about making a job as getting a job?
Yeah, I think there is some truth to that in the sense that because of technology, the cycle of job destruction or work destruction and renewal will happen faster, and so entrepreneurship will be more highly valued. But when you peel back the onion, the question is, what kind of entrepreneurship are we talking about? Are we talking about a new generation of sort of the next level of social media influencers, like that kind of entrepreneurship? Well, maybe not, right? Like maybe that's not going to sort of advance human achievement and lead us to greater human flourishing and prosperity. But there are ways in which we can think about the technology, the AI, actually being a positive, being able to actually make those kind of changes that you're talking about in ways that will increase the agency, will increase human success and well-being, and individuals will really benefit from being more entrepreneurial. But again, I think there's some asymmetry to that. It depends on what space you're working in and how. And I would contend, as you and I have known each other for a long time, that the learning system, both formal and informal learning, is still the most important driver of human development, right? That people actually learning and continuing to learn as the world changes is increasingly important to our shared well-being, to our shared success, which is why Lumina, as one entity in this space, continues to be focused on the next stage of what do we mean by increasing credential attainment, credentials of value in this environment leading to 2040. Well, that's changing. It's different than it was when we first set out to do this work in 2008 to try to get us to a 2025 platform.
So, Jamie, you recently updated your strategic vision. You had an old goal of 60% degree attainment in higher education, and you recently increased that to 75%, a goal of 75% of adults in the labor force having a college degree or other credentials. Important addition, credentials of value leading to economic prosperity. So you raised it, but you added degrees plus valuable credentials. So tell us why that's the new goal. Why is more higher education important given the rise of AI?
A little backstory on where we've been to set the context for where we're headed. So, back in 2008, when I came to Lumina, we saw the dramatic need for people with degrees and other credentials to power our economy and strengthen our democracy. And we set this goal of 60% of Americans having a high quality degree or other credential by 2025. That was the goal. And, footnote, since then, between 2008 and 2023, we went from a 38% attainment rate to a 55% attainment rate. So we'll get very close to that 60% goal by 2025. In my view, it's one of the greatest social change efforts that we've seen in the last 2 decades. And, I would argue that Lumina didn't, create a single credential. We helped to build some of the ecosystem. But I would argue that got people jobs in new fields, it increased wages, people became better citizens, better participants in their communities. And, I think all of that is something that we should celebrate as a society and as a education and training sector, because we help contribute to that. But we're in a different space now. And this is where I think, to your point about where are we headed, you've got things like doubts about job opportunities and the ways in which AI is really going to change the way we work and how we work and where we work and what we actually do. And of course, from the education perspective, rising costs are a major, major concern. The Inside Baseball research on confidence in higher education is that it's at an all-time low, right? So 36% of Americans say they have a lot or a great deal of confidence in higher education. It's a 20 percentage point drop in just 5 years.
It almost mirrors the improvement that you talked about from 35
Exactly.
to 55, and
Yeah.
the confidence has switched from 55 down to about 35. So
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's dead on right. So, we've been through. I'm a sort of historian of the field in the sense that, I've looked back at what happened after World War II. Well, the GI Bill, we opened up opportunity. We created access to post-secondary learning, the Pell Grant program, and the Higher Ed Act, and all these things, and it worked. We got a lot more people into the higher ed system. Did we solve the access problems? No, we didn't, right? Like we have differences by income, by race, by geography, lots of other factors that are really important. But the net total is much higher. Lumina and lots of other partners come along and we talk about increasing attainment, and it worked. Attainment has gone up and we have gotten a lot more people with degrees and other credentials. But now I think, we face this new environment that I talked about. And I think the transformation of the workforce and higher ed systems to better meet the demand for human talent, to expand economic prosperity, for individuals and society is really important. So that's why this goal of 75% of the labor force having degrees or other credentials of value leading to economic prosperity is so important, because I think that at the end of the day, we want to be clear about what a valuable credential is, right? And that is it's a 15-year arc. It's going to take time to be super clear about what that means. Right now, one measure we have is wages. Wages is a good measure, but it's an incomplete measure. You've got to sort of focus on what are the other ways in which these credentials are valuable. And then you've got to talk about what the role of education and training is in this broader idea of prosperity and economic prosperity. It's certainly not the only thing that contributes to prosperity, but what does prosperity look like? Certainly it means I've got, stability, and I've got a family sustaining wage. But I also think prosperity probably means things like I can participate in my community. I have the opportunity to do things in my free time that I want to do that increase my human creativity and potential. And I think all of those things are things that we need to be talking about in order to help better prepare us for this future that, as we've been talking about, is increasingly going to be transformed because of AI.
Let's talk about how higher ed is going to change, needs to change to help meet this new goal. Are these credentialing programs by and large going to sit outside of formal education, or do you see higher education increasingly incorporating shorter credential sprints in more formal degree pathways? Will it be a combination of those things?
I think it's going to be a combination. I think you've already seen some shorter term credentialing in particular being embedded in degree programs that you sort of, you're working on parallel tracks. I think that's one encouraging development. I do think, to your point, that more and more of the delivery of learning and the credentialing that comes with it is going to come outside of the traditional system. Though I think, very importantly from our perspective at Lumina, we need a way to judge the quality of all of those things, including what we do now in the traditional learning system, so that there's comparability, so that that your certification over here or your badge over there, or whatever these words are that we'll be using that you and I don't even know yet in a few years, how they connect to a bachelor's degree or an associate degree or the traditional things that we talk about. I think that's really important, and having a system that actually translates what and what this credential means and how it relates to what where you're going with your learning and how it connects into the rest of the learning ecosystem, I think is hugely important. So that's part of the redesign. But the other big parts of the redesign, I think, are having to do with financing, right? So making it more affordable. Affordability has been a part of the conversation now for decades, and on the one hand, we have reduced the cost for many people through financial aid and things like that has been a big success. I'm a Pell Grant recipient. I'm a walking example of why the investment pays off. But on the other hand, it's not clear that that system is really right-sized for the way in which learning is being delivered now. It's based on a very traditional learning model, seat-based classroom learning, lots of things that need to go away. And then, the bigger questions that we've started to grapple with in the sector is the redesign of the business itself, right? The business of higher ed, and how the traditional system will reinvent itself. So back to AI, I do think that in the near term, if we sort of take maybe a 5-year lens, that the greatest changes that you're going to see in higher ed are the back office in terms of AI. Lots and lots of things, from finance to the way in which we deliver student services, et cetera. A lot of those things I think are going to be transformed because of AI. The teaching and learning part, I think, is going to be in fits and starts based on the advancements in the technology. But I think the back office is pretty ripe for that. And I think it leads to productivity improvements, hopefully. That's clearly the design anyway. But I think more importantly, it changes the model itself of the business of higher ed. And I think that is a good thing and overdue.
What about apprenticeships, Jamie? Would you include apprenticeships in that meaningful credential category? And do you think they are they going to be an important contributor to your goal?
First, yes, we do consider them really important. And, there's again a tale of, there's two stories to tell here with apprenticeships, right? One is apprenticeships have long been a part of the American system. There's lots of different apprenticeships. And again, they're concentrated in certain industries, but you see a lot of apprenticeships out there. Some are registered, some are unregistered. So there's this debate about the quality of unregistered apprenticeships, et cetera. But I think we have a cultural issue in the U.S. This is the other side of the coin, which is that if you go to places like Germany or Switzerland or even the UK or in certain parts of Asia, Singapore, places like that, this idea of being an apprentice, is sort of culturally different than it is in the U.S. And I think the cultural change is going to be something that's hard to measure now in the U.S. We do have more apprenticeships than we had 5 years ago, but not a lot more. And I think one of the issues we're going to have to grapple with is what's the appetite both by employers and by workers or prospective workers in terms of apprenticeships. But I do think they are a part of this credentialing ecosystem for sure.
Jamie, I want to give you a chance just to talk about the work of the foundation going forward. I want to acknowledge that you've not only been a super thoughtful grant maker and convener, but for 15 years, you've been an impact investor. And so that you stepped into the equity space and supported entrepreneurs that are contributing to your agenda. Any changes that we'll see in the way that you carry out your work as you aim at this new 75% goal?
Yeah, I'd say three things, sort of building on the platform of where we've been as a guide for where we're going. So, not blowing it all up. Some people say, you go through a complete transformation. That doesn't make sense. But I think about sort of building on what we've done. These questions about the credentials of value and what do they mean and what do they represent and how do we get all of the providers of learning to actually focus on that idea is really interesting. A quick footnote on our prior conversation. So if you were to take the number that I mentioned before, 55% of Americans have a degree, certificate, or certification compared to 38% in 2008. And then you said, well, if you apply a measure of value, and the measure we're using right now is just a sort of a proxy, is a 15% wage differential between people who have a high school credential and those with a post-secondary credential. That actually brings the attainment rate to 44%, right? So 11% of them don't meet, 11 percentage points of the 55% don't meet that question of the credential of value. So that's a sort of important thing to think about in terms of the work going forward. How do we both make sure that every credential has value going forward? And how do we think about this idea of delivering on value? Again, not just wages, though wages are very important as part of a longer term trajectory. So that's one thing. The second, I think, is the work that we were just talking about, which is, broader redesign of the financing systems and structures and the ways in which we actually pay for and organize the system of higher education itself. And embedded in that is ensuring that we continue to focus on improving access and opportunity, continue to focus on making sure that students actually complete the programs they start. All of that is really important. And then the third, to your point, is thinking about all of the tools in the toolbox as a private foundation. We have been an impact investor. We've invested in a variety of different strategies using both our endowment and direct equity investment in startup companies as a part of our strategy. Because again, we believe that the private sector has a major role to play in the transformation of the delivery of post-secondary learning and the goals that we try to achieve. We're sort of re-examining our strategy right now with a terrific new lead, Casey Vander Ark, working with us at Lumina on rethinking our impact investing work. And so you'll see some sort of recentering of the work, but it's clearly part of our long-term plan. And we think that we want to continue to add value, but add new value in this space, making sure that our role as a philanthropic organization includes investment in private sector strategies.
We've been talking to Jamie Merisotis, the CEO of the Lumina Foundation, about their new goal. By 2040, 75% of adults in the U.S. will have a degree or a valuable credential. Jamie, we really appreciate your leadership at Lumina, appreciate your sector leadership. Anybody else you want to give a shout out to that's been an important contributor on this journey?
Well, I would say, two big shout outs. One is all of the other post-secondary funders that have been in this space that have done incredible work. Many funders have either come alongside us or done work outside of what we're doing, but still very much aimed at the same goals that I think is really, really important.
I'll interrupt you just to put a big exclamation mark there. It's really remarkable. It's not very well recognized, but about 20 years ago, about 15 foundations were formed by selling a set of student loan portfolios, and it created an extraordinary crop of foundations, and many are shoulder to shoulder with you trying to advance post-secondary attainment. I'd include Strata and our
ECMC
and Ascendium,
Helios, lots of them. Absolutely right.
USA, College
and traditional funders, right?
Yes.
Kresge and the Gates Foundation, lots of others that we're really proud to be working with and alongside in terms of that work. And the other shout out is the incredible array of partners that we have worked with to deliver on this. Again, Lumina doesn't produce any credentials. And, one of the things that we learned early in my journey at Lumina is that finding the right partners is key to the success of this work. Many of our partners have actually been states or these sort of innovative, large national nonprofits like New America and others that are actually contributing to the system change approach that we've taken. Lumina believes in this idea that I call the leadership model of philanthropy, which is this idea that with resources and expertise, we have a responsibility to not just make investments through our dollars, but in everything that we do. And as a leadership organization, it includes making sure that these kind of organizations have the capacity to do the work that they do to help them actually, they do the real work that makes a difference in terms of this. So those are two big shout outs I want to make sure that I offer here in terms of where we've been and very much where we are going in the work in the years to come.
People can find out more about your agenda at luminafoundation.org. Jamie, thanks for your leadership. Thanks to our producer, Mason Pasha, and the whole Getting Smart team for making this possible. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep innovating for higher ed degree attainment. See you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social media using the hashtag GSPodcasts. Thanks so much.